As a game designer, it's very frustrating for me to see valid player complaints that the players in question just don't have the words for. It's like, I know why you're making me mad, but I can't quite put my finger on it. It's often brushed off as something subjective, and the online discourse becomes about as low quality as the gameplay in question. You're simply not based enough to understand that skill drain is my comfort card. Well, I've had it, because in my eyes, a lot of these things aren't subjective, and YuGiOh will pay for its crimes against game design. Your 5-minute combo is a problem, and your recursive resource engine is too. Floodgates are objectively bad game design, and hand traps aren't skill testing decisions. I'll be going over a lot of the community's acknowledged pain points, and it will be through the all-important lens of why. Unfortunately, that means a lot of what I'm going to say isn't really breaking new ground, and even if my goal is to elucidate why, I'm probably going to sound like a broken record of complaints you've heard over and over again. But if you'll have me, consider throwing me on the second monitor, and let's discuss some game design. I really wish I had a separate video for this so I could point at the sign instead of starting every single video with explaining self-determination theory, but it will be the basis of how I'm judging YuGiOh, so I will give you a little bit of a preamble. Briefly, self-determination theory posits that humans are motivated to do stuff that meet their desire for the following 3 things: autonomy, mastery, and community. The argument is very simple. If a game allows players to fulfill these desires, it will be fun. Autonomy refers to the ability to make decisions that matter. In an RPG, choosing your character build and responding to NPC dialogue are aspects which support your autonomy. You get to choose your build, and also get to choose whether or not you're going to be an asshole to the next NPC you meet. Mastery is about skill expression and rising to the challenge. In order to beat a Souls-like boss, you gotta get good. You won because you learned the dodging patterns and got your attacks in when you could. This often overlaps with the autonomy pillar, as usually the skill you're expressing is the mastery you have over your build. Basically, we want things that challenge us, so that we can rise to that challenge and overcome it. Community can look like a lot of things. It could be the secondary content made about the game like videos and fan art, or the discussions that happen online about the most recent ban list. But community can also take the form of things like ranked ladders. We care about ranked ladders because it allows us to compare ourselves to other people. In a way, this makes the importance of a ranked ladder an inherently social context. The only reason I care to tell you I made it to 1600 rated is because I assume that makes me look cool or that you care about it at all. I know you don't. What I hope is apparent by the easy evidence of these qualifiers are that they're the most objective thing that I've ever been taught about what makes a game fun. It's a great lens as it applies to many observable patterns in game design and can easily explain why certain things rub players the wrong way. Tutorials constantly popping up on your screen when you're trying to play? It's infringing on your autonomy. Game feels baby easy because there's yellow paint everywhere. The game isn't challenging the player enough and isn't appealing to their mastery. And with that, I can now reveal the very earth-shattering realization with you that, frankly, in YuGiOh, the power level of cards is too high, and makes it very difficult for the pillars of STT to stand. Versus most competitive strategies, one player at the table will feel like they're not playing the game, in one way or another. And I hope it's not a far-fetched opinion, but I do think both players should get a chance for some fun to be had when they sit down to play. In context to STT, I think both players should get the opportunity to have meaningful decisions, and be able to utilize their skill at the game in some way, usually to gain an advantage. That is to say, if a player does not get to do those things, then the game is, by STT's criteria, an activity in which people would not be motivated to do. As a game designer, if I'm making gameplay that does not motivate or otherwise spark joy in the player by playing it, I believe I failed at my job and the game is objectively bad. So in summary, because I don't want to say STT 7 million times in this video, whenever a gameplay pattern undermines or prevents meaningful decisions, that's a strike against the player's autonomy. Whenever a gameplay pattern undermines or prevents a player from making skillful decisions, that's a strike against the player's mastery. And with all the theory nonsense out of the way, let's go over some examples of YuGiOh's bad game design. And what easier example to showcase than floodgates? So everyone except for the estranged floodgate player at your locals hates these, right? Well, yeah, kind of, but they exist in many sideboards as a way to win the game. Certainly it's hard to argue against people who want to use powerful cards in order to win the game. I mean, they're legal, right? I want to dispel this right away, because the point of this video is not for me to argue against people saying, Konami said it's fine, so we're gonna do it. What players often toe the line on, yet never quite making the assertion about, is that in order to make an objective game design argument, we do need to assume we have power over the game's design. Some players wish that Konami would ban floodgates because they don't like them, but I would like to instead posit that Konami should ban them because it is objectively wrong to include them in the game. Plain and simple, the point of a floodgate is to prevent some aspect of the game from happening, which means that in any case where a floodgate is actively doing anything, it is preventing one player a major piece of their autonomy, like activating cards. And most of the time, as a defending player, you can't really skillfully outplay a floodgate, because once it's active, it just kind of is. They're also typically difficult to out under these circumstances. Like, I literally can't send Albion anymore for Fallen and the Virtuous if there is a die-fi on the board. Didn't have Called By for Shifter? Out of luck. That's there for the next 2 turns. Got anti-spelled with a grip full of breakers? Better to just concede now. You could say that it offers plenty of control to the activating player, and makes them feel powerful. This is certainly desirable to people who want to win the game, but also it does not require a lot of skill. I don't think any player feels masterful by activating one of these, or at least I hope not. To be fair, it's not necessary for every single game decision presented to a player to be some high-level gameplay move. But I do think that important cards should have more degree of play to them than activate and immediately win the game. It's particularly strange because in other games, floodgate-style effects are often to allow for more reactive and slower strategies to have time versus the more broken decks. I apologize for the antiquated example, but Rest in Peace is a magic card that banishes all graveyards until it is removed from the field. The reason people run this is because if they didn't, Dredge would run them over immediately. And I think this is a key difference. Floodgates in other games are meant to bring parity to a losing battle in favor of slower strategies. The more broken decks come prepared to fight over said floodgates, and because the timescale of the games allow for it, an extended back and forth game can commence with the floodgated players still having a chance to come out on top. I would argue that since the purpose of floodgates in these games is to shift it more towards a fair game, one where players still have a lot of skill testing decisions to make, that floodgates can still have interesting gameplay. The difference for Yu-Gi-Oh! Is that the timescale of a game is so fast that the time spent trying to answer a floodgate is significantly longer than it takes for an opponent to attack you with 3 blue eyes. I will also clarify that this is not to say that the cards don't still frustrate players in other games, as they do still infringe on their autonomy in turning off a part of the game. It's just a bit strange to observe that they work almost completely backwards in Yu-Gi-Oh! If the purpose of floodgates in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is to promote low-agency gameplay with almost no skill required and little to no counterplay, then I don't think these cards should be legal. I will put it in all caps on screen for you one time, Konami, so that you can wake the f up. Floodgates are bad because it stops the gameplay. There are no skill testing decisions when these are active. This is objectively bad game design. Please remove them. Unfortunately, I know it's beating a dead horse at this point, but Konami hasn't seemed to get the message. I will continue shouting about it until morale improves, but for now, let's move on. Another avenue of non-engine that I think is worth talking about are hand traps. And while in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Hand traps aren't usually the be-all end-all, I still think the gameplay produced by them is often low agency, low skill expression, and low quality. I discussed hand traps in this video, including potential redesigns that I feel like would create healthier gameplay. Funny update on that, by the way, one of the new Raise Moon cards basically has my Droll redesign on it, which is only funny insofar as Konami knew how to make a better designed card than Droll and simply chose not to make it a hand trap. Regardless, let's discuss some cards I have issues with. Ash is something I could talk about for a very long time. So I'm going to talk about Ash for a very long time. Ash has a few blanket contexts that it's active in, and I will be looking at each of them individually. Ash as a defensive going first tool, as a defensive going second tool, as a defensive tool for the going first player on turn 2, and as a tool to supplement board breaking. In the first context, Ash has a going first defensive tool, it chucks Fua, and for my Master Duel brethren, Maxi, and this sucks. Don't get me wrong, it does its job for sure, but the problem is that the Charmies are very must-answer cards most of the time. Many decks require materials to convert from their hand into something on board, obviously, and in doing so Ash ends up eating the Fua. There isn't really a reasonable other choice when this trait is available, so it ends up being both low agency and low skill gameplay. So what if we can save the Ash for our opponent's breaking turn? There are certainly decisions to be made about where to place an Ash, and how you'd like to pair it with your engine's answers. One of my favorites is pairing it with Widow Anchor to beat a Cool Toon monster plus KTS. However, opportunities for Ash to be good are plentiful, and due to the fact that the going first player is already up on resources, it almost ends up not mattering how the Ash gets used, but more that it even gets used in the first place. You could say that throwing an Ash at whatever is usually just good, and not a skill testing enough decision to validate its ability to fill this role. Kind of the reverse of the must-answer scenario made by Fua. In this case, there are too many non-meaningful decisions for the player going first. It'll probably work anywhere, no skill required. So what about its most traditional and notorious use case, using it defensively when you're going second? And this also sucks. Modern decks rarely get turn skipped off of one Ashe, meaning that going -1 only for your opponent to play the game as normal is an awful trade for you. When it does skip your opponent, it's kind of like, okay? Was it particularly skillful to throw an Ashe at the first thing my opponent did, and there was nothing else they could do? Some people speak to choke points as an expression of skill, but I'm of the opinion that if the knowledge is standardly available about what cards are good to Ashe, then this becomes significantly less of a decision and more so playing automatically. In order for a decision to be skillful, there needs to be a reasonable alternative for the player to choose. This means the decision comes with real opportunity cost, and evaluation becomes important. And I really wish there were more decisions that required me to evaluate how I want to use Ashe, but the modern dominant usage of this card appears to be shotgunning it and praying. I will still go to bat for the player going second, as the last category is using Ashe as a tool to supplement board breaking. The real skillful decision is when not to use Ashe. Many modern cards actually have an interesting vulnerability in that they can be Ashed, which can help translate into a push going second. Break Your Tail traps have draw on them, so they're ashable. KTS is usually used to dodge single target interaction, but it can also be Ashed. Branded is rampant in Master Duel, and Ashe is a very good check for both the Synchro and 4-star versions of Ecclesia. And while I've spoken to the many cases where Ashe is very autoplay and low skill, I really like trying to find a good spot for Ashe on my breaking turns. There's one last aspect of Ashe that I would like to talk about, which has a direct tie into SDT. From a metagame perspective, Ashe will be everywhere. In particular, KT being a top dog means that you're pretty likely to see Ashe in combination with several other 1-for-1 hand traps. This is unfortunate because the expectation for what a deck can do now has a barrier to entry as it needs to contend with 1-4 hand traps from the opponent. This limits deck choice very heavily and means there's overall less agency when picking a deck to play. All that said, unfortunately, it's still hard for me to call this card healthy for the game. It often ends up being a low skill trade with Charmies and borderline useless as a defensive tool for the player going second. That is until it's the most broken defensive tool and literally turn skips the player going first. Usually that decision has to be made completely in the dark, so it's not like the defending player is making a skill testing decision, they just whip it at their opponent's face and pray. Saving Ashe for your breaking turn is definitely a decision with some play to it, but because ashing the first thing your opponent does has a real chance at turn skipping them, I can't really justify this as a decision. To top it all off, it's a monster for the player going first, in that it can basically be used anywhere and it'll be very good. I feel like Ashe has been the poster child of YuGiOh, similar to Force of Will in Magic's Eternal formats. But I think in its current iteration and usage, it ends up creating low quality gameplay and putting an unnecessarily high barrier to entry on what strategies are good enough. The next group of hand traps I would like to talk about are the Charmies, and for my Master Duel homies, the damn roaches. I lovingly refer to these as economy turboers, and by that I mean lovingly hate. The obvious first thing to note is that these cards are really good to shotgun in your opponent's draw phase. This is primarily viewed as a way to play around talents, but I'd also argue it's risky to wait regardless. Modern decks currently have a lot of access to quick synchros, quick fusions, and quick links. That waiting for any of these to be available on board will make it difficult to activate Fulos profitably. And unfortunately, this leaves Fulos as a very low skill ceiling card. You're priced into auto-playing it because of the significant strategic risks associated with waiting, and I would overall classify this as low agency, low quality gameplay. You're kind of activating the thing hoping it turn skips them or you'll draw a million cards. So that's for the activating player, but what about the player who got Fulos? Depending on the strength of the deck, I think there's a skill expression in evaluating your next extra deck summon versus a Fua draw. In my opinion, the first draw is a reasonable trade for setting up a negate, but sometimes you may have a lot of non-engine in hand and you'd rather rely on that as a way to beat the Fulos. In this case, because evaluation matters and can legitimately depend on what's in your hand and what deck you're playing, I think there's a reasonable amount of skill to playing under a Fulos. But unfortunately, the card still ends up running into similar problems as Ashe. In the cases where a player can't possibly ever play under a Fulos due to their deck choice, it's a turn skip and both agency and skill expression become irrelevant for the defending player. And I think this is a failstate that's much too severe. If I have 1 million cards off of Fulos, it's really hard to lose. If it's trading with Ashe, well, that decision was basically forced and nothing really happened. And attempting to do anything skillful with it often ends up backfiring, which leads to games basically being decided if a frame 0 hand trap resolves. It's incredibly polarizing in outcome, and is ultimately low-skill gameplay, which I believe leads to low-quality games. A common defense for these cards is that it is required in order to compete with a deck that summons a lot. But I'll be frank in saying that I fundamentally disagree with a balancing strategy which deems that the only way to fix a non-game situation is by throwing a haymaker which makes another non-game situation. If the ultimate goal is to make gameplay which promotes autonomy and mastery for both players, all of these things need to be addressed and fixed. The last hand trap category I want to talk about is the Floodgate style hand trap. I will not reiterate much from the Floodgate section of this video, but it follows a lot of the same problems. Droll is a card that you want online basically as soon as possible, leading it to similar low-skill gameplay as traditional Floodgate effects. Additionally, Droll is a very powerful Floodgate. Many decks will simply fold as their combos can no longer be executed at all, and leave the Drolled player not playing the game or making any meaningful decisions. There are many people who claim you can simply play around Droll. I am one of those players, as there are several ways Strikers tries to play around Droll, and I frequently use to win matches where I do get Drolled. However, in the same way as Hash and Fua, just because there is a world where a card can be played around or can create gameplay, there are also many fail states where it cannot be. And in those cases, the gameplay is, well, not. It's unplayable. If it's a Droll behind an entire end board, there's no chance of playing through it anymore. If it's a Droll against a deck which requires searching at all, then it's a turn skip. If it's Droll which forces a specific line, like against Strikers, it's frankly boring and kind of pre-scripted. Everybody hates this card, and I wish Konami would just aggressively tune the game so that we can get rid of it already. Shifter is another one that just gets shotgun and follows a similar pattern. In the games where it's good, it makes the game unplayable, and the piloting player doesn't even need to perform any kind of interesting game decisions to come to the conclusion that, hey, if this works, my opponent instantly loses. It's often played in decks that don't care about being Shifter, obviously, and thereby turns the rest of the match into sweet old garbage time as you watch your Malice opponent combo into the sun, while you take 0 game actions. Again, a lot of this parallels the Floodgate section, so there's not much else to say. The gameplay is low skill, low agency for both players, and the fail states result in players literally not playing the game at all. We'll go a bit more freeform for this next bit, as I initially had this section split into their own deck archetypes, discussing combo decks and their propensity to make boards that are literally unbreakable, and mid-range decks with their propensity to make the most annoying 10-turn games possible. But I realized that the actual problem is extremely simple and is shared by both halves of this coin. Every competitive deck aims to make a game state that is effectively unanswerable by their opponent. It doesn't really matter if the way the situation was created is through a deck's crazy recursion engine, a card that for some reason Konami hasn't banned on your end board, or a going second card which can't be negated, destroyed, or butt-plugged. All these situations are the same. The end goal and ideal game state of basically any competitive strategy is to win the game in a way your opponent cannot do anything about. And people don't like it when they don't have a chance. This is because, obviously, if none of my decisions matter, then why bother taking any of them? And there's literally a term for this, originally used in sports, called garbage time, and lots of games do their level best to reduce it because, understandably, players hate it. It's when the game is effectively over and you're just running through the motions of losing. It's widely seen as a significant drop in the quality of play, thus the name garbage time. And to be honest with you, upon my several rewrites of this section and running it by my friends who also play Yu-Gi-Oh, there's really not much to say. It has been said 1 million times, but I do genuinely think we may be approaching the game being so powerful that it's unplayable. We may legitimately end up with the only gameplay being garbage time for the second player, and that's frankly, well, garbage. I do want to have some hope though, and honestly what I looked towards was the concept of rubber banding. I know it's a bit contentious because players don't want to be babied by the game systems, and similarly players who are ahead want to feel like they're winning, but I think there's a good precedent for rubber banding style effects already. Dracotail Ketu is a Rhoda that allows for a fusion summon push when going second. KT has on-synchro effects that are certainly used in their going first board, but are also really good at breaking when going second. I think that if more decks had access to quality breaking tools in-engine, then players would have more to look forward to when they go second. And I really think they need to be in-engine, like capital L locked, because it allows for those decks to have unique identities and how they interface with breaking boards. And I think that the more unique options that going second decks have to break boards, the more interesting gameplay you'll have out of players trying to figure out what they're supposed to be doing going first. Skill testing decisions revolving unique aspects of matchups, I think, is some of the best gameplay Yu-Gi-Oh has to offer. I think playing around decks with unique going second tools may spark more life into games where otherwise counting cards in hand was enough. And I know we're on the precipice of some crazy power creep with the printing of Crown, Accusation, Fallen and the Virtuous, and decks like Toon around the corner. But I'm still holding out hope that Konami aims to continue pushing support that lets players have some decent play going first and going second. These cards give me hope that it's possible, and I really think Konami wants to continue fleshing out design in this direction. I like staring down huge boards and want to get into the nitty-gritty of card interactions with strategies firing on all cylinders. That's just peak Yu-Gi-Oh to me. But the problem at the end of the day is that there are no cards really helping outside of explicitly breakers to make the game playable for the going second player. Which I want to give the addendum that I don't like the trend of unnegatable breakers either. As is hopefully clear at this point, players want some agency over what happens in the game. The more a card is uninteractable, the more of a pain point it will become. You do not want to know the obscenities that my locals have said about Super Poly. So I think there are several aspects of Yu-Gi-Oh! Which lead to games that feel like they're only being played by one person. Whether that's searchable floodgates or a resource engine that could not be stopped by a 100-mile-per-hour train, the glaringly obvious problem with Yu-Gi-Oh! Is that cards are simply too powerful. Which I understand is an unfortunate nothing burger of a statement to make. I wanted to highlight how all these gameplay patterns are untenable, using my game design background as force, but honestly it just feels like I'm saying water is wet. And that's really disappointing to me, because I think there's a lot to like in Yu-Gi-Oh! About how the base systems work. The chain and trigger timings in general are a massive playground for outplays, with chain blocking and other trigger interactions like the Ray Rose trade and striker meters. Board breaking is supposed to be fun, whether that's with powerful spell cards or monsters that have 3 modes of material on them. Yu-Gi-Oh! Can have such rich gameplay, it's just there's so much garbage obfuscating it. I think the TCG ban list has made a lot of correct moves, like the wave of floodgate bans last year, but it's not nearly enough yet. There are still design outliers, which cause non-games constantly, and that frustration takes a toll on anyone who wants to stay invested. My locals is not popular, and despite the fact that I just want to shuffle up and jam, I can't help but feel empathetic towards anyone who looks at this dog game and goes, yeah, enough is enough, I just can't play another game under Droll, I'm quitting. I really hope Konami figures it out, because I'd love to actually reach out to my card game loving friends and genuinely recommend them Yu-Gi-Oh! Unfortunately, at the moment, I cannot. The design problems are glaring to me, and I am fully aware of all the nonsense that is rampant in modern day Yu-Gi-Oh! But let me know what you think in the comments below. With any luck, Konami might actually fix the game with the upcoming ban list, but let's be real, that's not happening. I hope I was able to paint a picture for you today, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.